And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center, deep in the heart of the city we so love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of, well, some 300,000 plus stories. The conversation we're about to have, I believe, is one of the most important conversations we'll have this year on the Coalition. It's fundamental to a number of issues: civil liberties, personal rights, the right to free access, the right to property. Of course, perhaps one of the most contentious issues of our time, the role of civil disobedience in a polite society. My experience with civil disobedience. As a libertarian, I believe heavily in the rights of property. And there are some who will argue successfully that civil disobedience is an encroachment upon the individual's property rights and the individual's right to free egress and free access. On the other side, if you will, there's the notion of what does an individual's responsibilities lie in achieving justice in a society where, quite frankly, justice is not easily found. I'm 57 years old. I missed the episode where a large group of politicians / business leaders / community leaders got up and said, you know what, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. I missed that episode. I've lived in tumultuous times. I go back to black and white TV and getting the first TV on the block. I go back to the Ed Sullivan Show when it was not a post-ironic, post-50s comment on American society, but it was something we looked forward to every week. I go back to a time when Archie Bunker, Carol O'Connor, was a wildly popular show for two reasons. Number one, obviously its use of racism as a comedic subject in order to enlighten people on racism, but at a time, too, when millions of Americans looked at Archie Bunker and smiled and agreed with him. I go and lived through, as a small child, the great race riots of the late 1960s, the Civil Rights Program, women's rights, LGBTQ rights. Now we talk about rights in the war on drugs, and we talk about rights, folks are the members of the LGBT community, so they can have equal access to the benefits of society under modern law. I lived at a time when the HIV crisis blossomed, exploded, tore apart entire cities, while people still called it the gay disease. I'm not sure if it's taught me anything except for one thing. The only thing you're entitled to in this life, apparently, is what you demand, what you go out and grab. Occasionally, and I use this term rhetorically, because I, as a libertarian, I swear and took an oath against violence. A lot of people don't realize that. But you've got to grab issues by the throat, and you've got to shake them down, or else we will be run over as a society. Right now in this world, we seem to have determined that accident of birth decides when and what civil rights are available to you, what type of life in general. As a libertarian, I believe in the free idea, the free exchange of people, of commerce, and ideas. Our broadcast from Mexico and New Mexico a few weeks ago brought home firsthand the notion that the people looking to come across the border are not people largely looking to sponge off the welfare system or take our children and our money and live a life of luxury. The people that I met firsthand, had conversations with, were largely members of the working poor who lived in societies ripped to shreds by the war on drugs or ripped to shreds by oppressive nations, who simply wanted to enjoy the type of life that we do. So it's against this backdrop that I, as a libertarian, and I, as an individual, make the conversation, the decision about civil rights in a time when, quite frankly, civil action requires sometimes extreme measures. And I've decided individually that I come down firmly and squarely on the side of civil disobedience. Civil disobedience hastened the end of the Vietnam War. Civil disobedience accelerated rights given to people of color. Without civil disobedience, quite frankly, I believe that some of those same actions would be going on. And it's a lack of civil disobedience that has allowed us to be mired in an endless war in Afghanistan and has allowed us to watch blindly Dancing with the Stars while people have walked across continents simply to gain access to the American dream, to work their way through the American dream. So it is in that spirit that I invited our guest, Phil Eden. He is a representative, I want to get this right, of Never Again Action. They've been in the news. I'm not so interested in, shall we say, rediscussing or rehashing some of the more controversial events. I want to welcome you to the show, and I want to give you an opportunity to just let's talk about your organization, how a group of largely young folks who are Jewish decided to rekindle, drive home a point that was taught to them by the history of their grandfathers and grandmothers, and how they chose to take that and apply that to the civil rights crisis we face in the nation today. So thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you for having me.
So it's a national organization. If you go to their website, and we posted that on the coalition homepage, and there's direct access to it. Your organization nationally has sponsored events across the nation aimed at, and perhaps, and so I want you to challenge me and explain this to me, obtaining civil rights for immigrants across the nation. Tell me more about your mission, though, and how it was conceived and brought to this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the first action happened in New Jersey, led mostly by folks out of New York City. I was not involved in those conversations, and I wasn't even involved in the first conversations when folks here in Rhode Island decided to take action. But the idea is, I think, a pretty simple one, which is we start with the foundation that all of us, white, black, and brown, wherever we come from, however we got to this country, whatever language we speak, we're looking for the same things out of life. We want to be able to take care of our kids. We want our families to have a better future than we do. We want security. We want peace. We want to be able to work hard and take care of our families. And we see in the treatment of asylum seekers and immigrants coming to this country a lot of the same treatment that we've seen of Jews throughout our history. And so we are doing what we wish people would have done in the 1930s in Germany, which is standing up and taking action and not accepting this vilification of a group of people based on who they are and where they come from.
There are a lot of folks, I'll keep my thoughts out of this for a second, who look upon the United States as a beacon of criminal justice and will claim to be horrified that in their terms, not mine, that you would conflate the horrors of the Holocaust with the ills being perpetrated on folks who, and they emphasize, illegal aliens coming to the United States.
Yeah,
talk about that. No, talk about that.
Well,
please.
I think 2 points on that. First is that whether or not somebody crossed the border with documentation, which most of these folks have, most of these folks are asylum seekers coming across through the legal system. That is the legal system. It's a different legal system than when maybe a lot of white people in Rhode Island's families came over from Ireland or Italy or Poland or Portugal, because the system was totally different back then. But that is the legal system. Also, the Holocaust didn't start because one day everybody decided, hey, let's lock up all the Jews and put them in gas chambers and kill them. The Holocaust started because politicians and leaders in Germany were not able to solve the country's economic problems, were not able to deal with really deep-rooted issues, and so they looked for a scapegoat. And they picked Jews and Roma and gay people, and they scapegoated them and vilified them and blamed them for their problems. That's how it started. And we're seeing that today. Mm-hmm. You know, it is President Trump, but it's not just President Trump. The political class in this country for decades has failed to address Americans' basic economic needs. Healthcare is going up every year. The idea of having one job and working 40 hours a week and getting to see your kids after you get home from work, that is a luxury these days. Right. And I think President Trump has made that worse, but he has not caused that problem. Successive administrations of both parties have contributed to this problem. And because they aren't offering solutions to the things that really matter to us, they're looking for a villain to distract us. And that's how it starts. If this is how you're treating immigrants today, when the economy is relatively good, what's going to happen to the people that you're blaming for our problems when there's a recession? Things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And people being held today are being held in really horrid conditions. I mean, we've seen the images from the border. You were down there.
Right.
Folks are being held in cages. People are being deprived medical attention. They don't have toothbrushes. They don't have water. I mean, not everyone who died in the Holocaust died in a gas chamber. Many people died of typhus or infection or a lack of medical attention. And we're seeing that today. So I don't think that parallel is too extreme. I think we are seeing the foundation being laid for a scapegoating of a group of people that could lead very easily to even greater mass atrocities than we're seeing right now.
Right, and let's look at American history. I'm as proud to be an American as anyone else. I'm a patriotic American, which is why I get so angry at some of the generalizations and cliches and tropes that people present constantly. I want to point to two, and because I agree with you, we as a nation, as long as I've been alive, we picked out different groups to vilify. I remember growing up, it was the Russians. For me, personally, I was born in the very early 1960s. But let's point to two seminal events, if you will, in the late 1930s and early 40s. And in 1939, you had the SS St. Louis. If you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
Well, the SS St. Louis was set sail from Hamburg to Cuba, was carrying 937 passengers, most of them Jewish refugees, seeking asylum from Nazi persecution of Jews in Germany. Didn't end well.
Yeah, we turned them away.
Right. Move forward into the early 1940s. What nations set up concentration camps, internment camps we call them then? We always, I'm older than you, so I'm always going to make references and tease younger folks about it. But go back and Google or go to YouTube and listen to some of George Carlin's performances where he would talk hours about how government and society took terms and conflated them. We call them internment camps. We didn't call them concentration camps. The Germans were all about concentration camps. We did that with American Japanese, many of whom were patriots, had been in this country for generations, some of whom helped form this country, and we did that to them. So the basis in any society, the seeds, the groundlings, if you were, for a society based on fear, repression, and ultimately some type of totalitarianism is based on failed governments and failed societies conflating individual ethnic groups with their challenges of the day, whether they be economic, whether they be racial, fill in the blanks. There is a clear history of that here in the United States, as there is around the world. It's a human condition. It's not anti-American to cite human conditions, is it?
No, I totally agree with you. I think we've seen this movie before, and as Jews, I don't know that non-Jews understand how deeply resonant the Holocaust is in our collective memory. I'm only half Jewish. My dad was Jewish. My mom's from Ireland. And we didn't even grow up particularly Jewish. We did Hanukkah and sometimes Passover. But the Holocaust is such an important part of our collective identity and our collective memory. This is a little anecdote, but I want to share it. The first car I ever bought was a Volkswagen Passat. I got it for like $800 from my friend's mom. And when I drove it home, I thought my parents were going to be excited because I had saved up and bought this car. And my dad was furious at me for buying a German car.
Right.
And that is so ingrained in his sense of identity. He's passed away now, but at the time it was such a big part of him. And when we see something like this happen, it's just such a red flag. Like, we know, we've seen this movie before.
Right. I'm not sure where we got the notion that somehow being born here allowed you to be the last one in terms of a life of liberty.
Sure. A friend of mine just sent me the other day something from the West Warwick, I don't know if it was the West Warwick Beacon or the West Warwick paper from the late 1800s saying it was a public project that the city of West Warwick was contracting, and it said, "We will not hire Italians." And I think that folks maybe forget that the Irish and the Italians and the Portuguese faced horrible discrimination when they came to this country.
Right.
And now that they're here and they're in the middle class, some folks maybe forget that history and want to kick the ladder out so other people can't climb up.
There is I was listening to a Boston radio station a few months ago. It was ironic because a young woman was filling and hosting, and she had made her bones as a challenger to the Democratic nomination for the Massachusetts gubernatorial race a few years back, and she was an immigrants' rights attorney. And I hear her talking about, do you want your children's necks to get slashed? Do you want your children to be... What's the reality of crime amongst immigration? Is this some invading force that are here to take our children and take our society away at any level?
No, absolutely not. I mean, from the statistics I've seen, areas with more immigration have lower crime than areas with lower immigration. It's folks who are coming here for the same reasons that most of our families came here. And I don't want to say that all of us, because there are people who were brought here in chains. There were people on this land before white colonization of it. But the majority of Rhode Islanders, at least, our families came here and were welcomed here. Roger Williams came here and was welcomed here. Roger Williams was a religious refugee fleeing from Massachusetts, and the Narragansett indigenous community welcomed him. Mm-hmm. And now we are not affording that same luxury on lands that really we stole from the indigenous folks. We're not welcoming people onto this land. It is beyond absurd.
One of the most enduring stories told in American cinema and American literature is the story of the mother willing to traverse great lengths to put herself at risk physically to provide for the safety of her children, to literally give of herself, mm-hmm. perhaps her last dying gasp, her last dying effort to save her children. It's pervasive in our entire culture. Why then do you suppose that we as a culture would then, and I've heard this term used here in Rhode Island, it's irresponsible for a parent to take their child across Latin America into Central America to get to the United States? How can we be so hypocritical?
Yeah, honestly, I don't think that there's much logic in it. I think it is a fear-based reaction to changing demographics. Mm-hmm. And there's an interesting set of studies that I was reading and looking at, that if you remind white people that the demographics of this country are changing and there's a projected date where white people will be a plurality, they, as a group, myself included, I'm white, are more conservative in their immigration and economic policies. So if you conduct a survey of white Americans, and before you conduct the survey, you remind them of the changing demographics, they're likely to be more in line with of harsher immigration policies and cutting welfare spending and things like that. And I think that racial fear, while I don't want to give it the legitimacy of saying it's understandable, I think that it is wrong, and we need to address it head on, and we need to confront it. And I think that a lot of politicians have been playing on that racial fear to try to divide people and keep people scared, so that they can distract us from their failure to fix people's underlying economic conditions.
Because here's the two great ironies, isn't it? In a nation with a declining birth rate, like the United States, in a nation whose probably single greatest export is higher education. We as an economy, forget about civil rights, forget about humanity for just a second, and let's just think about the dollar. We as a nation stand to benefit exponentially from increasing the labor class and simultaneously increasing participation by academics from around the globe in our economy, in our innovation economy, as well as our university economy.
Totally. I love the way you put that, because even if this wasn't economically the right thing to do, it would be morally the right thing to do. That said, it is economically a no-brainer. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, spends about $133 per detainee per night to keep them at someplace like the Wyatt or in those cages at the border that we've all seen pictures of that are absolutely horrible. $133 is roughly $48,000 a year per person. Most of these folks coming seeking asylum have families that they could be staying with while they're waiting for their asylum proceedings to go through court. There is what I believe a horribly detrimental law that these folks can't work for this first 6 months that they're in this country. They need to be here seeking asylum for 6 months before they're allowed to work. I live in Wakefield. Maybe some of these asylum seekers are nurses. We have nursing homes that will hire them. Maybe some of them are really great with people. We have group homes taking care of Rhode Islanders with developmental disabilities that would hire them. Maybe they're skilled construction workers. We need those. Maybe they are cooks. Every restaurant in Wakefield needs a cook. It's so absurd to me that our economy is struggling from a lack of labor, and we have hundreds of thousands of people willing to work while they're waiting for their asylum case to be heard. Mm-hmm. They're just sitting here costing us $48,000 a year. It's craziness. That's like, my brother goes to CCRI on the Rhode Island Promise. Mm-hmm. That's $4,700 a year. Right. So we could send 10 kids to CCRI and take one of those folks out of the Wyatt. They can stay in my house. I have a guest room. They can stay in my house, and we'll get them a job based on whatever their skill set is. Mm-hmm. And they would be paying taxes. They'd be contributing to the economy. They'd be helping out some small business who's looking to hire somebody. And you could send 10 more kids to CCRI. It's so frustrating because it is both economically stupid and morally repugnant. And this is where we are. And that's why we're calling on our elected officials to close the Wyatt down. We should not have private prisons in Rhode Island. We want to close down. We want them to do everything they can to release those folks. I know that some of that is a federal issue, but we want those folks released. And we want to end Rhode Island's collaboration on a local and state level with ICE, so we're not sending more of these folks, locking them away in these horrible conditions.
Yeah, and I want to get to the Wyatt now. As a closing thought, I interviewed a number of folks who were Cuban, who had walked in probably a few trains and maybe even a few buses and a lot of hitchhiking from Cuba. They managed to get over to Brazil. They wouldn't tell me how because they didn't want to, social media. Mm-hmm. Something goes viral. Mm-hmm. In fact, they didn't even want to be on camera. We had a translator. So they got from Cuba to Brazil somehow because now the infamously titled wetback program has ended, so you can't swim over anymore. Mm-hmm. Then they got from Brazil somehow to New Mexico border. Mm-hmm. Last time I checked, that's a relatively long hike. 3 of the people I interviewed out of 4 at one location, one was a nurse, one was a construction worker, skilled, finished carpenter, and the other one was an electrician.
That's exactly it. I mean, go to any nursing home in the state, go to any hospital in the state. We desperately need nurses. Look at any construction site. We desperately need people to work there. And these folks have their skills, they're willing to contribute, just like my family did, right? I mean, my mom is a nurse. She came over from Ireland. My dad he didn't immigrate himself, but his family immigrated from Eastern Europe, fleeing pogroms. America welcomed his family, and he started a small business, and he hired people, and he was a physician assistant, and he took care of people. We are a stronger country when we recognize and welcome people. And even if that wasn't the case, it's still the right thing to do. There's I'm not particularly religious, but I do celebrate Passover, I do celebrate Christmas and Easter, and there's one phrase that is very commonly repeated in both the Torah and the Christian Bible. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap, and that is, welcome the stranger, for you were once strangers in the land of Egypt. We've all been there. We've all been in need of help from the stranger. And with how crazy the world is, maybe we're going to need that again. You know, with climate change and global conflict, there might come a time where we might need to flee to go somewhere. And what do we want? We want somebody to build a wall and keep us out, or keep our children out, or keep our grandchildren out. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, and if you look at other developed nations like Germany, the UK, we are at the very bottom in terms of welcoming refugees. You know, and when you see the people who are on who had fled the Bahamas just a few weeks ago, to not give them some sort of semi-permanent residency when essentially their island had literally been wiped off the face of the earth, is breathtaking to me. One last question before we get into the Wyatt, because I want to focus on the Wyatt. But the term pogrom is a very, very powerful word in recent European history, and it's a word that I think has been forgotten at the risk of all of us, because I define a pogrom as a well-defined, well-planned government action to systematically eliminate a culture, a race, or a society. That's how I define it. Comment on that, and just how easy is it for a developed nation with quote-unquote civil rights and democratically elected representatives to lurch into that world?
I think it's frighteningly easy. I mean, Weimar Germany was among the most developed nations in the world. The scapegoating of others is a movie we've seen repeated and repeated and repeated throughout history. And it's not just Hitler, and it's not just Slobodan Milosevic, and it's not just Saddam Hussein. These happen in developed countries, developed quote-unquote countries as well, high-income countries. And it's very easy to slip into that when most people feel like their kids are not going to have a better life than they do. When most people are starting to feel hopeless. And there's a lot of hopelessness going around right now. The economy's stagnant, wages are stagnant, maybe GDP growth is 2.5% or whatever, but most people aren't feeling that.
Right, you and I aren't.
And most people are working 2 jobs, they go to the doctor, and they can't even afford their medication. And when you're feeling hopeless, not to mention climate change, which is so scary, it's hard to even think about having kids. When most people are feeling that hopeless, it's really easy to look for a scapegoat. And we're really afraid of that, and that's why we're doing this. That's why we're standing up and saying that we're not going to let that happen here.
Yeah, and I congratulate you for that, because it's when people of goodwill stand up and simply, first off, say no, and then secondly, take aggressive action. And I'll close out with, I had this opportunity to visit people in Deming, New Mexico, who in the shadow, and people I'm learning across the Texas border have done similar actions, in the shadow of these government, call it what you will, have set up private refugee centers, feeding, clothing the most challenged amongst us. If you're Christian, what is more Christ-like? If you're Jewish, what is more sympathetic than that? Brings us to the Donald W. Wyatt Detention Facility. A little bit of background. I'm old enough to remember when the bloody place was built. I have someone I admire a lot. He knows who he is. He's a professor of physics at the University of Rhode Island. He was the first person ever to use the term economic racism to me. The Wyatt, I think, is the earliest vision of economic racism that I saw in Rhode Island. And economic racism is when folks who know better go to a city, a community that is financially challenged. Central Falls is blossoming on its own finally now. Fits and starts. But it's a wonderful community of a lot of hardworking people who, in a moment of weakness, whose civic leaders embraced this vision of a for-profit prison, that somehow it would increase property values. Oh, yeah, we've seen how that worked out. And allow jobs to be created for people in the community. Flash forward how many years now, we've understood that now that the prison is terribly run. It was decertified by the federal government just a few years ago because of the treatment most exhaustively of an individual who had cancer. The wages that are paid are minimal. I have had in the past on this show a gentleman from RIBCO, which is the Rhode Island Brotherhood of Correctional Officers, and they talk about the near absence of training in a prison that was built to harbor, temporarily at least, that was the original mission, federal prisoners, some of whom were notorious. So you've got this prison, which is now a detention center and is working actively with ICE. It's sponsored by, I guess its primary funding is what, UMB Bank?
Yeah.
And what is the current status, if you could give me, from your perspective, the state of the Wyatt Detention Center, who is it housing and why have you chosen this as an organization to challenge?
So let me first say I'm not an expert on this, but we do know that there are at least 100 folks detained by ICE at the Wyatt right now that our tax dollars are paying to keep there. We know that most folks in the city of Central Falls don't want this prison there and don't want them cooperating with ICE, but the bank that is the primary shareholder is refusing to let the city act in a democratic way and is not letting them cut this contract with ICE in the interest of their shareholders making a profit. This is the closest place to us where folks who are coming here seeking asylum are being held, and it's happening right in our backyard. The treatment, from what we can tell, has been horrible. The folks who have gotten out with bail that is absurd, $25,000, $50,000 bail. If, by the way, any of your listeners are interested in supporting the bail fund, AMOR, the Alliance to Mobilize Our Resistance, is doing fantastic work raising money for people's bail and helping them out. It's AMOR, and you can find them online. So this organization is, the Wyatt, is holding people in horrible conditions, denying them medical attention, and they're cooperating with this totally inhuman, unjust, racist policy, and that's why we're there to shut them down.
And you're maintaining vigils there?
We've done several vigils. We've conducted demonstrations. We've engaged in civil disobedience, blocking the driveway so trucks can't get in and out. And most recently, we've been protesting their board meetings because the board is scheduled to vote on a forbearance agreement that would double down on their commitment to contract with ICE. It would open the door to full privatization, which would mean a for-profit company, which, to be frank, the company is already making money off of caging human beings, so I don't know how much more disgusting it gets than that.
Right.
But if it was a full for-profit corporation, it would remove even the level of accountability of a board somewhat responsible to the community overseeing it. Mm-hmm. So we've been protesting at the board meetings and holding vigils there as well.
Okay. I'll give you a little tidbit. You may not know this. A lot of folks have never heard of UMB Bank. Who the hell is UMB Bank, right? Mm-hmm. If you're a Fidelity investor, UMB Bank, Fidelity Investments, the famous Fidelity Investments, UMB Bank is the primary correspondent bank for Fidelity Investments. Mm-hmm. So if you're a Fidelity investor and you're frankly horrified by this, as I am, there's an additional outlet to reach out to. And I would ask you to reach out to Fidelity Investments and say, if UMB Bank will not divest themselves, if you will, and remove themselves from the Wyatt Detention Center and continues to pursue a policy where they will cage human beings for simply wanting to become Americans, then you need to remove your money from Fidelity Investments. Because I also happen to believe in boycotts. You know?
Definitely. It can be a really effective tool.
Right. In fact, there's a great series being run on NPR right now about the role of boycotts in the civil rights movement. It was the primary economic tool that the African American community, I'm old enough to say that, or people of color, used to leverage themselves into a position of some control over their lives. So it's frustrating, to say at the very least, to see an organization wielding its corporate power to make money, literally, off the backs of folks grotesquely less fortunate than we are.
Yeah, it's horrifying, but it's not unexpected when you allow companies to make money off of the caging of human beings. They will push for more caging of human beings. That's their incentive. And that's why our call is not just shut the Wyatt down, but ban private prisons in Rhode Island. People should not be making money off of keeping other human beings in cages.
Right. Yeah, it's, this prison has been in search of some type of business model almost virtually from the day it opened. And so what you've got is a group of people looking to leverage our current foreign policy, which, by the way, is so fundamental to creating the crisis we have right now. That's disgusting. And let's remind people, too, that these are people who are going through a legal process as defined by United States laws. They are applying for asylum, and arguably a significant number, if not all, are eligible for asylum under the very concept that economic forces from the United States have created a situation that is politically untenable for them in a number of Central American countries, to the point where drug gangs, narco-terrorists, and or, let's just say, totalitarian regimes sponsored by the United States have created unlivable positions where they are in fear of their life. And that's textbook asylum law. You may not like it, but that's ultimately what creates someone seeking asylum. And these people are vetted extensively, yet we turn our backs on them.
Yeah, it's horrible. And the one thing that you'll often hear from opponents of our organization is, well, we can't welcome everybody. Mm-hmm. They'll say, well, you can't just throw the doors open and welcome every person who wants to come to America. But these folks are willing to contribute. We need their help. We need their labor. And the conditions that they're fleeing from are in large part due to horrible conditions and treatment and policies by their own government, but also U.S. companies. I mean, in Central America, the banana companies created a lot of the situations that we've got on the ground right now, backed up a lot of the times by the United States military, who is more interested in the profits of the banana companies than the human rights of the folks doing the work down there and living there. So to just turn our backs on them now is not maybe surprising, but it is horrible, and we need to change that. We need to step up and do the right thing.
So when is I'm not sure how often you publicize your actions, or do you? But when is the next event or the next visual that you're willing to discuss publicly?
We don't have anything planned right now, but we do have a Facebook group, Never Again Action Rhode Island, where we are discussing and kind of planning what's coming next. The board at the Wyatt has shown that either they are unwilling to do what's necessary, or due to the threat of lawsuits, unable to do what's necessary. And so our demand is really for Rhode Island's elected officials right now. Lots of states have done this. California, Iowa, Illinois, New York, Minnesota have all passed laws either banning private prisons or banning collaboration with ICE. And we're asking our elected officials, demanding our elected officials step up and do the right thing. So we're going to be maybe shifting focus to state reps, state senators, and our governor to make sure that they take this issue seriously and step up and really do the right thing and act like good Democrats on this one.
There you go. Well, I applaud your commitment to it. Frankly, I'm impressed.
Well, we appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me and for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, and I want to stress that it's an open door to all of you, particularly if folks find yourself again incarcerated merely for challenging a situation like this. It's times like this when we look forward into, in the future, we'll look back on moments like this, and we will see, on a variety of levels, whether it be the war on drugs or the war on immigrants, who had the strength to stand up.
I think that's a really good closing point, is that when these atrocities have gone on throughout history, most people have made the decision, and it's an understandable decision, to put their heads down and hope it all blows over and just kind of get on with their day and continue business as usual.
It can't happen here.
We can't let it happen. We got to stand up. So inviting everybody, stand up, come out to an action. We have all levels of participation. You don't have to get arrested if you don't want to, right? But we do need you with us. We need you to stand up, and we need you to call your elected official and tell them to close the Wyatt, ban private prisons in Rhode Island, end collaboration with ICE, and say that never again means never again. We're not letting this happen in Rhode Island. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
We're going to take a quick break right now. Joining us in just a minute or two, we're going to have Kevin Broccoli. He is from the Epic Theater. And the performance that they've got coming up, in addition to a slate of what I found out to be very provocative, very entertaining theater, is perhaps, I think, a new moment, if you will, in, shall we say, in the political theater world. It's great stuff. We're going to take a very quick break now. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network here at the Go Local Live Broadcast Center. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course, our home, the mothership, CoalitionRadio.us. We're enheartened by the number of folks who've taken time over the last couple of months since we started asking, begging, pleading, to follow us on social media. Social media is the mother's milk, if you will, of independent media. It's how we get out to the masses, how we, shall we say, broadcast to the people, how we swim through the white noise that is the current culture. We appreciate you taking the time to do that. We're going to take a very quick break. We're going to get Kevin on the phone, and we're going to continue tonight's show.